Can people hear me? I think I disappeared for a while. Can people hear me? Okay. Okay, so on to this, the latest offering by Abdul, we have a comprehensive history of the discipline of Black Studies, demonstrating how Black people established the field long before its institutions. The history of Black Studies takes us through Black Power, the New Communist movement, the Black women's and students' movements, each of them a step in the journey to Black liberation. So I welcome our guests this evening, and I open the floor to you, Abdul.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm now at this moment trying to share my slides. I think I should ask Kieran to help me with that. If you can make me a host. Okay, I'm a host now. Great. My slides visible?
Yes, they are.
Okay, great. So it's a great pleasure to be on this Zoom with old friends and colleagues. My book on the history of Black Studies is about the US experience, an inclusive approach that I will describe. But right at the start, I want to say there's a companion volume coming out this fall called The Future of Black Studies. So this conversation will continue, and I'll have something to say about that as well. My hope is that this experience can be used as comparison to other countries as part of global anti-colonialism, anti-Eurocentrism, and anti-imperialism. Let me begin by clarifying an inclusive conceptual framework for Black studies. What I want people to consider are the following 5 aspects of Black studies. First, that Black studies includes the study and teaching about African Americans, including Africans and other African descendant people throughout the world. In other words, it's pedagogy, it's the educational process. Secondly, it's where Black people themselves are the main agents or protagonists of the study and learning. In other words, the agency of Black people is what drives Black studies. And 3, Black studies counters racism. This is not a neutral activity. It occurs in the context of the oppression and exploitation of Black people, and therefore the rational response includes the agency against that racism. But it also represents the celebration of the Black experience, the cultural performance and self-affirmation is critical to this. It's not just part of the reason, it's also part of the emotions. And lastly, Black studies represents an analysis of the economic, cultural, and politics of the American experience, the Western European experience, and the experience really of all throughout the world. In other words, the particularity of Black experience gives us a doorway to the universality of the human experience. These 5 actions of Black agency were initiated as resistance to Eurocentrism. In the United States, this first took place in the historically Black colleges and universities that were mainly set up after the Civil War. Fisk University, shown in this slide, based in Nashville, Tennessee, as well as most other HBCUs, was modeled after the mainstream predominantly white institution, or PWIs, where the curriculum was grounded in the classical literature of Greece and Rome. Here you see what they were studying in the 1920s at Fisk University. Of course, this is an important part of world culture. However, without a Black perspective, it can manifest itself as a form of self-negation and forced assimilation. So the battle was on to affirm a Black perspective. Now, Fisk was the first institution at the college level to organize an African studies curriculum. The general narrative in this country is that a white anthropologist at Northwestern University, Melville Herskovits, was the first to do so in 1948. No, that's not true. Black people started it 5 years earlier in 1943. My first job was at Fisk University after graduate school. And digging in the archive of the library, I actually found the curriculum and the pamphlet that was produced. So I have the evidence of this important historical development. This program was established by the man you see here on the slide, Mark Hanna Watkins, an African-American anthropologist and linguist who studied at the University of Chicago under Edwin Sapir, the linguist, and worked at Fisk University from 1934 to 1947. Even more fundamental in Black studies as intellectual history has been the ideological development of the radical Black tradition. Here are some of the people central to this tradition and key representatives of the Black liberation movement: Ida B. Wells, Ella Baker, Marcus Garvey, W.B. Du Bois, also a Fisk graduate, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. They embody the ideologies of Pan-Africanism, nationalism, liberation theology, feminism, and socialism. So our first context for understanding Black studies is how it has manifested itself as intellectual history, the HBCUs and the community with its ideological production. The next context that I want to describe very briefly is Black studies as social movement. In this book, we cover 6 movements. Each has had 2 kinds of educational programs: mass education, or the broad community, to raise consciousness among the general community, and a more intense form of education for the development of movement cadre, staff, to make sure that these movements exist and can develop. So first, the freedom movement. Often this is called the civil rights movement, locating it in the context of the Constitution of the United States, but really Black people have always thought of it as the freedom movement, which really is a different kind of strategic orientation. The Black Power movement that developed after 1966, which was a shift, a paradigm shift, where now the focus was not so much on how to negotiate our way into the mainstream, which really then created a rather narrow path. It was to turn back to the broad masses of Black people and to argue that our collective agency was the basis on which we could confront the structures of society and develop programs of social transformation. And of course, the Black arts movement. This is when every genre of the arts, the literature, the painters, the photographers, every aspect of the arts self-organized in search of what we call the Black aesthetic. And the whole agency of that was to shift the audience from the gatekeepers of the art establishment and the mainstream and the commodification of art to the broad masses of people. And so it was to look and learn from the masses of people and give them art that they could appreciate because it represented them. The new communist movement developed because the Black workers, and I have more to say about this, developed agency that reignited the imagination of a post-capitalist future. And the Black women's movement was fundamental to raise the issues of patriarchy and male supremacy. And then, of course, last, the Black student movement, which is very important because it developed after the assassination of Martin Luther King. There was a great enrollment of Black students, and that led to Black studies in the mainstream. I'll have more to say about that. Now, the social process within these movements has been the development of what I call emergent institutions, often spaces and organizational structures of roles and rules that carry out educational programs. The Freedom School was created as a movement alternative to the inadequacy of the public schools that either was a silence about the Black experience or was pejorative about the Black experience, both in general, as in the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964, or as part of a campaign of struggle like during the Chicago school boycotts when students were out of school. So the churches and community centers immediately set up educational programs so that the kids, the youth, could continue their education now with a focus on what really now we know as Black studies. Another example of an emergent institution is Malcolm X Liberation University, set up in 1969 in Durham, North Carolina. After a Black student struggle at Duke University, including a building takeover, the students and community activists led by Owusu Sadoki set up Malcolm X Liberation University. At this table, you see Owusu and Chuck Hopkins, one of the Duke student leaders. They established a curriculum of Pan-Africanist theory matched with practical skills for community organization and economic development at the grassroots level. Now, the development of a Black workers' movement led to a resurgence of the left, what became known as the New Communist Movement. Here is the best example, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, developed in Detroit. They not only fought on the factory floor, the first major Black insurgency since the 1930s, they also set up a newspaper, a bookstore, mass educational forums, and a book publishing company. The League created an educational process that impacted Detroit and the movement throughout the country. On the right, you see General Baker, and yes, his parents named him General. Now, you know, what a gift from your parents to give you that kind of authority as part of your identity. He became the personification of a proletarian intellectual. Now, the Black women's movement was critical as the movement was still lagging in backward thinking and practice regarding women. Here we see on the left Fran Beal, who out of SNCC led a collective of women to form the Third World Women's Alliance with their newspaper, Triple Jeopardy. This is when we used to make it plain. Today they call it intersectionality. Back then we called it triple oppression. On the right is Audre Lorde, leader of the LGBTQ tendency. The great lesson is that the greatest weapon against patriarchy is the self-organization of Black women as agents of change. Now, the movement that led directly to formal Black studies programs in the mainstream of higher education has been the student movement. There was a great enrollment of Black students after the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. And the students brought with them the Black power ideology that sprang forth and had developed since 1966 and had become part of the Black consciousness of the time. They took militant action against the seizure of buildings, including the seizure of buildings and mass mobilizations on campus and in the community. Here are two examples, San Francisco State and Cornell University. This, of course, led to the third context or stage of Black studies. Black studies as academic profession. Now, I sum this up as these six aspects that are general, that help to give us some understanding, although every campus had its own history, its own local political culture, because something we didn't really understand at the very beginning is that when Black study was created, it entered into the local political culture and therefore had expectations that had to be met. The first is social disruption. This was not a logical process that developed on the basis of the normative conversation we think as essential to the university. These were political actions taken by students that forced an agenda, building takeovers, confrontations with the faculty. So this is very important to understand that this was a political project of Black power that created Black studies. But once it was created, there had to then be a debate, a discussion. So there were conferences, seminars, workshops, articles written, debates that took place in order to develop a consensus around what it was. I remember when we were in an involvement in board meeting and somebody said, well, what do you want? And the basic answer was, what do you got? And they said, well, we have sociology. So we want Black sociology, Black history, Black literature. But then when we left that meeting, we had to look at each other and say, what is that? And then we had to rediscover Black intellectual history so that Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson and Charles Johnson and many, many others helped to inform us because we had a literature on which we could stand. Building institutions, this is the organizational structure. Departments, programs, institutes, centers, all these different forms inside the university represented change. We were forcing an agenda that was moving the university forward. Establishing the profession. There's three things that happened. First, journals were created. Second, professional organizations were created. And third, the PhD degree was created. And that helped to consolidate a profession. Theorizing took place. Now, remember when I talked about the ideologies from the community, once those ideologies hit the campus, they then were transformed in theory, which led the basis for research. This is very important. And then lastly, of course, the norming of research. There's more to say about all of that. Now, looking at the future development of Black studies, I want to say that what happened in the US sparked a new attention to the study of the Black experience in Africa and throughout the African diaspora. The basic framework that I've been laying out is a good way to map how this has happened in different countries. In many cases, there are fundamental issues that have to be confronted. Just give you one example. In Germany, there are no statistics taken by the government, so there's no official record of even how many Black people are in Germany. And so Black people themselves, the Afro-Germans, are beginning to take that on. And there are other institutions. For example, the Free University is where I taught a course in Black studies. Audre Lorde taught a course in Black women's studies. But around the world, there are these various developments that are taking place now. There's more to learn about that. And I write about that in the next book that comes out in the fall. Now,
Abdul, excuse me, I'm just saying you have 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes.
Oh, yes. Well, I'll be finished in much less than that.
Okay.
Now, for years, I joined an annual festival of Black Studies practices through my association with the work of John LaRose and Sarah White, and many comrades, including Gus and Margaret, who are on this panel. This was an amazing experience. The New Beacon Bookstore and Publishing House held the Radical Black and Third World Book Fair festivals, and of course, the political struggles that worked hand in glove with the literary and cultural work. The book fair ranks at the same level, in my vantage point, as the Pan-African Congresses. The people who came together represented the meeting of the continents, people from many parts of Africa, many parts of the Caribbean, many parts of Europe, and Asia as well. Now all of this work is being archived by the George Padmore Institute in London. Also, I want to give a nod to my publisher, Pluto Press, who has also been at this for over 50 years. Now, so that's the diaspora. That's going to be a major aspect of the next decades of the development of Black studies. Now, my second point is that the future is going to increasingly be the appropriation of information technology. And on this slide, you can see what we started 25 years ago on the campus of the University of Toledo. Now, as you see the basic activity, professional discourse, curriculum development, research productivity, public policy, community service, all of those things will remain. But as you can see, there's a move from Black studies to what we call e-Black studies, or what you can say is the movement from the actual to the virtual. And then, of course, you see the experience that we had at the University of Toledo. But just imagine this. Here we are on Zoom. Who could have imagined that we could have this kind of simultaneous connection everywhere in the world? So we, in some sense, are negating space by virtue of this new technology. So Zoom is, we're Zooming. This is the new normal. Now, as I end, I'm going to make this point. We live at a time when a neo-fascist tendency is emerging in the United States, really throughout the world. And there are two new words that I want to share. They're new to me. They may not be new to you, but they're new to me, that ring true in the US. One is anocracy, A-N-O-C-R-A-C-Y, anocracy, which means a society that is moving from democracy to authoritarianism. The second word is kakistocracy, K-A-K-I-S-T-O-C-R-A-C-Y, kakistocracy, which means rule by the least qualified. So our condition is that our kakistocracy is creating an anocracy. We're in trouble. And so the survival of Black studies is really got to be based on the ability and willingness of Black people to fight for it, to struggle for it, to fight against the anti-scientism that is troubling the consciousness based on the importance of this right-wing fascist tendency that we're facing. So our future will be one of struggle. But our past is so rich, and there's a treasure trove of knowledge to stand on. And that's the basis on which I wrote this book. And I hope that you can use it as you face the reality of your situation, because I only write it as a contribution to struggle. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate that you didn't end at struggle, but that you ended, you know, with the fact that we have a rich legacy, and we have strong roots that we can, hold on to and utilize. So I'm going to turn now to Margaret and just ask you to respond. You have 10 minutes to respond in, as was explained earlier, respond in any which way you feel is appropriate to what Abdul has shared with us. Margaret Busby.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you so much, Abdul. I think, well, the first thing I must say is that your book is really spectacular. It really is a landmark, and it's, I have to admit, I'm still digesting it, and I'm still learning from it, and there's just so much information in it, and it's a book of history, it's a book of reference, and it's definitely a book to keep returning to, and I'm going to look forward to the next one. It's hard to know how to respond in a brief way, because so many of the things you've said resonate with me, and I'd love to explore more. But I think maybe I'll talk about something about how I came into the whole Black studies arena, if you like, because the international influence of Black studies is something I'm very aware of, and that I've benefited from personally. I come from a family that's Pan-African in orientation. I was born in Ghana, as was my mother, but her father, my grandfather, George James Christian, was born in Dominica in the Caribbean. And he was a delegate in 1900, the first Pan African conference in London, where he made a speech about the treatment of Africans in South Africa. And after he finished his law studies in 1902, he migrated to Ghana. And he stayed there till he died in 1940. And my father, George Alfred Busby, was also born in the Caribbean, and he grew up in Trinidad. And he went to school with C.L.R. James, and George Padmore was another friend of his. And he won what was called the Island Scholarship, which enabled him to study in Britain. And in fact, I have a copy of a postcard he wrote to W.E.B. Du Bois, who was then the editor of The Crisis, asking for more information about the Pan African Congress and bulletins. And my father qualified as a doctor, and he practiced in the working class area of London. And in 1929, he too relocated to Ghana, and he worked as a doctor in the rural areas. So I was born into an awareness of diasporic links and Pan-Africanism. However, I found myself in England, where my parents hoped to give my siblings and me the best educational opportunities. And as I came of age in the 1960s, a young African woman born in Ghana but educated in Britain, I struggled to find material with which I could identify. Long before there was anything named Black Studies were precisely what I needed and I lacked. I'd gone to a progressive international school in England, and I attended Bedford College, a pioneering women's college at London University. And literature was one of my favorite subjects, alongside art and music. Yet nowhere in my official curriculum did a single Black writer feature. I knew a lot about Latin and French and all sorts of other writers from different parts of the world, but no Black writers. So the challenge that I instinctively set myself was to remedy that deficit by searching for whatever books, journals, magazines I could find, wherever I could find them, usually in some corner of a secondhand bookshop. And in fact, the closest I came in my English university degree course to anything to do with African people was when I read Faulkner, which had Black characters in his work. So in the gaps between my formal curriculum and what I wanted to do, I began collecting the evidence that there was a literary context to my own existence. And it was out of that that I had to sort of weave this tapestry of trying to find the truth about African knowledge and creativity to fit myself into that gap, if you like, because there was just nothing that I could relate to in my education that did that. And I used to clip things out of the newspapers about the freedom struggles in the civil rights movement in America in the 60s, or actually I stopped doing that when Barack Obama came on the scene in 2008 because I just couldn't keep up with the coverage. But I was just very aware of any book I could find that had Black or Negro in the title. So I found a copy of a 1962 anthology called Beyond the Blues, which was a collection of poetry by African American writers. In fact, that came with an LP of readings by people like Brock Peters, and that was a wonderful book to find. And any anthology I could find of African poetry, Negro poetry from America, it was just a wonder, but it was just so rare. In fact, one of the strange things I found that when I was at university, I used to write for my college literary magazine that I was editing, and I wrote a article about the Harlem Renaissance because I was gleaning all these bits of evidence from America about the black struggles, the black creativity going on there, and I was diarizing the dates of everybody when they were born and died. They were like my family because I didn't have those resources around me. In fact, it's that Sankofa Ghanaian concept. I was trying to. It was a counsel to be mindful of your past because that would help you move forward into the future, and that was what I was trying to do, looking for these bits of evidence that we existed in the past. And I was doing this from a position of being in Britain. And so I graduated in the 60s and I began to put into action plan to become a publisher, which I did in 1967. And it was in that context I first began to visit and interact with any bookshop that had books devoted to African and African descended people. And that was when, in 1966, New Beacon Books became the first black bookshop in this country. So that was really something powerful to discover. And then later, um, Jessica Huntley and Eric Huntley started the bookshop that became the Walter Rodney Bookshop. So it was a rarity to find a whole bookshop that one could access literature that resonated with what I wanted to do, what I wanted to know with Black studies, if you like. And then as I became a publisher, I met somebody called Sam Greenlee, and he became the first novelist I published, a book called The Spook Who Sat by the Door that no one else wanted to publish anywhere, but I took Sam on. And we found a lot of the books I was publishing in that era were connected with the struggles in America. I published Rat Brown, Julius Lester, Ishmael Reed, lots of African American writers, as well as writers from Africa, Bucha Macheta, Arthur Maimani from the Caribbean, George Lamming, C.L.R. James. So I was trying to put it all together, if you like, and it was a sort of patchwork thing, and it was really helped by the fact that the Black studies had begun to happen in America, thanks to people like Abdul. Thank you, Abdul. And I was able to be grounded in the works that came out of that Black studies movement. And it was that whole feeling that helped me compile the first anthology I edited in 1992, which is called Dorsals of Africa. And it had in it more than 200 women of African descent from around the world, through the ages, from ancient Egypt. And it was because I could access a lot of these materials. And I was often asked, how long did it take to put it together? And I said, well, I'd either say it took 18 months, or I'd say all my life, because I would just have to reach to the bookshelves I had and pull down magazines, journals, anything that I'd been collecting over the decades that I could find to really put some spotlight on these Black women writers, African women writers who had not had the attention they deserved. And I made sure in that first book to have a huge bibliographical section at the end, probably about 100 pages, which listed as many sources as I could find, including, I think, Abdul's 1984 Introduction to Afro-American Studies. Was that it? So I listed anything I could find because I wanted people to say, I didn't want people to think I'm just having these 200 people are the only people you need to read. I wanted to say, go off and discover all these other books and writers. And that was before the age of the internet. Now people would just go online and look things up. But that was the reason for it. I wanted to spread the word, if you like. And the same thing applied when I did an anthology in 2019 called New Dorsals of Africa. I was trying to shine a light on these women who deserved to be better known, who had been ignored for so long or undervalued. And what's been doubly gratifying about finding all these brilliant writers is the fact that they all were so generous. They waived any fees. And as a result, we were able to have this wonderful award, a scholarship that is linked to SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies at London University, which means that an African woman student will get a free course of study because of the generosity of all the contributors to New Dorsals of Africa. So that is something, I just see a sort of chain from that early searching for the Black studies literature oeuvre that led me from there to where I am now. And ironically, what's has lagged behind in Britain is the study of Black British writing. So it's interesting that there are a lot of publishers now playing catch up and trying to find Black British writers, and also that there is a landmark MA degree course in Black British writing at Goldsmiths. So I think all these developments are part of something that goes back to the vision that, Abdul, you had 6 decades ago, if you like. Was it 6 decades ago?
Couldn't have been. I'm going to thank you so much, Margaret. I've been a rather lenient chair, and we've gone over by about 2 minutes.
Sorry,
but I really
sure
no, that's all on me.
Far too much.
I really, there would never have been the right time to just kind of to stop you before. I wanted you to definitely be talking about New Daughters of Africa and Daughters of Africa, and just thank you so much for giving us, a bit about the journey that you've been on in terms of Black studies. And Black studies, as we know, it's a broad church. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to move now to Kehinde Andrews. And Kehinde, like Margaret, you have 10 minutes. If I'm really emotional, I might give you an extra 2. Kehinde Andrews.
It's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to say good evening. It's an honor to be here. Obviously, Abdul Alkalimat. We've met a couple of times. We're having is one of the first interviewees on our podcast for Make It Plain around Black studies. I haven't met Margaret yet, but massively influential and very good to meet you in this virtual space. And obviously, Gus John. Go a long way back, and there's people in here have a lot more to say than me, a lot more experience on these issues, and it is an honor to be here. I think the main thing I want to pick up from the book, because the book is really, it's in depth and it's fascinating. And I mean, we have Black Studies, so we have the first degree in Black Studies, and I guess I'm the first professor of Black Studies as a title, but that does not, I wouldn't want to suggest that Black Studies is new in any way in the UK. It certainly is not. There's a long tradition of Black Studies in the UK, people like Professor Gus John in the university as well. So what we managed to do is essentially bring it together and have a space, a critical mass, because universities don't like to employ Black people. We've managed to get, a number of scholars into the same place doing critical work, etc. But there is a long tradition of Black studies in the UK, which none of our work would make any sense without. And most of that work is in the community, right? So it is people like Margaret and the publishers, the publishing houses, actually publishing. I mean, if you think about the British Black Power movement, what was it predominantly? It was about education, right? It was about a different way to think about the world. I usually sit in front of my bookcase, which is over there, which just has lots and lots of books, which I took from my mom's house when I moved out. This is, for our generation, honestly, we don't understand how difficult it would have been to access this knowledge. Like, we can just go online, we can go on Amazon, you get a book tomorrow. It's like easy for us, like easy peasy. When I talk to my parents about, how they got I don't know, some of you got the Panthers on here, Angela Davis's work, philosophy, the Opinions of Marcus Garvey, some of the books published in the UK, like how the West Indian child was made educationally subnormal, or how Europe underdeveloped Africa. I mean, they actually had to be made like in the actual movement, and in the books that we were able to get, it took ages, it took weeks. He had to look. My dad tells me stories about him going to some guy's house in America and going up 22 flights of stairs and then getting 5 books and then coming back and bringing them to England. And they're the only copies of the book in the country. Like, we just don't appreciate. Honestly, we don't appreciate it. And then the events that were happening, the bookshop movements. Saturday school movement, things like that. So there's a whole legacy and tradition that we have benefited from heavily, and essentially have said, well, let's bring that into the university for the first time. But really, Black Studies, and I think what Abdul's book is great in showing, is that Black Studies does not start in the university. It is not owned by the university. It very much is something that starts outside, and then is brought in. And that move that you can see in Abdul's book, from community politics, putting pressure on, in the 60s, when you get Black Studies, that is kind of the first time that you have lots of Black students at white universities, and they come into the universities and they're like, what on earth is this? This is going to have to change. We're going to have to demand different things. We're kind of in a similar moment in the UK, right? Like, the major difference demographically with the UK and the US is that slavery took place in the nation state in the US, so you have a lot more Black people there after abolition, whereas here slavery takes place in the Caribbean. My family's predominantly Caribbean, and couldn't move over because of the ocean. The movement it basically takes longer, right? And because of that, there's less of us, and so we are like break into higher education is really in the 80s, probably in the 90s, and really in the elite institutions is only in the last few years, which is why you're seeing students demanding change, right? They're going into Oxford and Cambridge and they're going, what on earth are you teaching, right? So it's a very similar moment in that sense. And I think the question is, and a provocative question for me is that you see that move, and we're heavily influenced by what's happened in America, obviously, because the first Black Studies, such an influential move. But if you see that movement from community knowledge, community organization, that practice, and then that movement into an incorporation into the university, well, I think we have to question whether that's been a good thing for the knowledge, right? Like whether that's been a good thing for the Black Studies that is produced. Now, I don't want to criticize my American colleagues. I do a lot of work in America and have a lot of American academic friends. But if we I asked this to maybe I have to pick this up in the Q&A, but like take someone like Malcolm X, who's my absolute favorite. Love Malcolm. If Malcolm was born today, Malcolm would probably become a professor, right? He'd have more access to stuff, they'd have more opportunities, there'd be a route for Malcolm to come. He's proper intellectual, really could have been a professor, but because of racism, it isn't, right? So let's imagine that Malcolm X was a professor rather than an activist, right? Would he have produced the same work? My answer is no. I'm 100% convinced no. It would have been very, 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 very different, right? To what extent, as we brought Black Studies into the institution of professional Black Studies, to what extent have we kept that activist connection? Have we kept those roots in the community? I would argue they probably have withered away slightly too much. And I guess that's probably my fear in the UK, is that as we say, well, actually, let's bring this community knowledge into the university, it becomes professionalized, it becomes institutionalized, and maybe it becomes more distant and further away from the kind of roots of it. This is what I'm actually kind of what's the word, absolutist when it comes to Black Studies. Like that science of liberation, that element of community engagement, that idea that Black Studies isn't just about talking about Black people, but it is very much about how do we change the world, how do we work together, how do we work in communities to make things better. For me, that's an absolute essential ingredient to Black Studies. And I think we're thinking about, in the UK context, we're thinking about, well, we've got Black Studies in the university, where are we going? How do we make sure we maintain that? Because that really is like, and Abdul's book is really good on this, that really is the foundation of it. That's how you only get Black Studies in the university, because of the Black Power mobilizations, because of, some of the earliest like academics were actually Black Panthers, right? Like we're actually in the Black Panther Party. You don't
5 minutes, Kehinde,
yeah,
5 minutes.
Way quicker than 5 minutes. You just don't get the incorporation of it without the movement. You don't get the knowledge without the movement. And I think the further we move away from having Black knowledge home being off campus, like I guess that would be the thing I'd say. If you think about in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s probably, and in the UK later, because we have been excluded from these kind of institutions, we have had to have the home of Black knowledge be off campus. There hasn't been a choice, right? But as you get incorporated, then the home can shift to the university. But the question we have to ask with that is, well, if the home of Black knowledge is the university, is it distinguishable in any meaningful sense from the rest of knowledge, right? And is it really got those radical commitments and those radical roots? That's, for me, the important question for Black Studies. And I would like to think it is possible. And I don't want to sound really negative about in America, because there's so much good stuff happening in the US. In fact, that's why we interviewed Abdul. We're also interviewing Patricia Collins, whose work is astounding and connects the community to. There's no hope and no models, but I think for me that's the main thing, making sure that Black studies doesn't become institutionalized as it becomes professionalized. That's one of the main dangers here, and then it loses that connection to the community. But hopefully Abdul's work and Abdul's book and Abdul's history of work as well, there's a model there that we can follow, then that's the kind of Black studies that we need. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Maybe I am perhaps a little naive or a little more optimistic. I don't feel that it will. The reason I don't feel it will shift away too much and become too institutionalized or just be institutionalized and that's it, is because the struggle is a struggle, and things are actually getting harder at this point. And I feel that we'll have to be very community active. So we go now to Professor Gus John. Gus John, here I am as a Trini woman being strict with time. I think I'm not doing too badly. So for you, 10 minutes. If I get emotional, an extra 2. Thank you, Gus John.
Can you hear me? I'm getting a reverb on this. I don't quite understand why.
Yeah, it's a serious echo. I don't know.
You're on twice, Gus.
Just hang up one of them.
Hang up one.
Leave, end. Red button at the bottom.
Hang on, just a minute.
Just hit one of the red buttons at the bottom of the screen.
Can Karen advise?
There it is. Good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Look.
While Gus is sorting that out, let me just say, Abdul, that
if you're hearing me, let's just do this without camera so that we don't waste too much time. Okay.
Okay. I'm seeing you.
Sorry about this. I'm not quite sure what happened there. But first, I want to thank Abdul for the book. It's phenomenal, as Margaret has said. And I want to thank you for that really powerful synopsis you gave us at the beginning. There's just so much that the book evokes for me, and in a sense, having come into all of this roughly in the same manner as Margaret, it has illuminated so very much. I want to say 2 or 3 things. First of all, to thank Abdul for reminding us that it is the agency of Black people that created Black studies. And I want to put that in a slightly larger frame, which is about human liberation and the historical struggle of Black people for human liberation. We are all, as human beings, endowed with a fundamental instinct for freedom. And we go to all kinds of lengths to defeat those who want to deny us our freedom, even if it costs us our own lives. And so the struggle for human liberation was accentuated as a result of transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. And what followed took different shapes in different parts of the diaspora. I was thinking when reading the book of how very different, for reasons that others have given, including Kehinde a minute ago, how very different our development across the Caribbean region was in relation to, for example, African Americans. But in the midst of all of that were two things. One, the struggle to reclaim our essential humanity as a result of what imperialism and colonialism did, not just the barbarism, but the deracination, the complete erasure of everything that made us human, the denial of our cultural traditions, the denial of our spiritual traditions, and all the rest of it. But throughout history, cultures of oppression have bred cultures of resistance. And what Abdul has so skillfully described with a huge amount of evidential data to back it all up is the extent to which the cultures of resistance combine two things. One reinforcing the other. The one being our fundamental creativity, whether it be in terms of literature, music, art, whatever it is, which was not bound by or defined by racism, but which came to our aid in that process of resisting racism. And I think quite often we ourselves are encouraged to think that that creativity cannot exist or gain expression in the hostile environments in which we find ourselves unless we are in the struggle against racism. The other thing I want to say is this, really, that for me, this book holds a mirror up to white oppression across the globe, and indeed our entire struggle as people on the continent and in the diaspora holds a mirror up to white supremacy, a history of racist oppression, and so on. And in that sense, we are through the Black studies and all our creations and creativity within that, we are on a journey of repair, self-repair, against all of that damage that colonialism and imperialism did to us, to our psyche, to our sense of self, to our definition of ourselves, and so forth. Repair and restoration for all of those reasons too. And in that process, in the process of gathering all of that stuff, in the process of producing knowledge on our own terms, not just in the academy, but through what we do on a day-to-day basis, what we share, how we relate to our environment, how we relate to the whole business of work and selling our labor. We are constantly in the process of self-discovery and self-affirmation. And I think to a very large extent, this book couldn't come at a better time. I mean, leaving aside the fact that all of these wretched institutions that have perfected the whole business of excluding and demoralizing people suddenly had a kind of epiphany when George Floyd was murdered in Minnesota. Leaving that aside and all the hubris that is involved in those reactions, the point, one of the points that Abdul made towards the end, where he talked about anocracy, democracy leading to or being displaced by authoritarianism, I think is particularly pertinent to this discussion because, you know, it's been in this country, in the UK, it's been really alarming. The attacks that there have been from people in government and increasingly authoritarian government on critical race theory, the Black Lives Matter movement, on the teaching of radical politics in schools, or what they call not differentiating between opinions and facts and what have you. In a sense, trying to control what teachers actually do as they open children's minds. Now, I mean, Paulo Freire had this wonderful saying that education doesn't change society, education changes people, people change society. And the whole schooling process, not just in this country, is more and more about molding minds, almost like thought police, and constraining those who want to open people's minds, tell them the truth, rewrite the history of white supremacy and what have you, and enable people to get some understanding of what equality and equity really means, and of what it means for us to draw upon that rich historical tradition that we have as depicted in Abdul's book, so that we can better plan the future, a future based on human liberation that has the hallmark of equity, of justice, and so on. So we constantly, I'm finishing in one moment, we constantly in a struggle, and in this society, we're almost forever in a struggle against a growing authoritarian state led by donkeys, who have very little concern whatsoever of the havoc they are brewing for future generations. So I think the role of that book, not just in the academy, but within our community education and community struggles and our movements, is in my view going to be inestimable.
Thank you so much, Professor Gus John. Thank you for that. As ever, in the company of our guests, we're learning, always learning. I've never come away from a conversation with Gus where I've not learned something. Abdul, same, and Margaret, same. Let's just go, there's a question that I can see here. And Gus, actually, you referenced this issue that comes up in the question. The question says, how should Africana or Black Studies programs at the tertiary level lend support to teachers who are, it says K-12 teachers, to teachers who are under assault for teaching truth? So how should those programs at tertiary level lend support to teachers who are under assault for teaching truth? Anybody? Gus, seeing as you just, and Abdul, I'd like to hear actually perhaps a quick enough answer from both of you.
Very quickly. It's an age-old struggle. I remember in 1960 something, not long after it was published, reading Harold Cruz's The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And I read that in the context of what was actually going on in the US at that time, but also having recently come from the Caribbean and understanding those workers' struggles that Arthur Lewis wrote about, etc., and the kinds of things which my father, as an illiterate peasant farmer, was involved in at highest levels of politics within Grenadian society, it seemed to me that we needed to be very clear about the conjunction, the meeting between what we were doing in building social movements, workers' movements, even amongst the poor and dispossessed and the illiterate, and what we were doing in the academy. Now, it seems to me, therefore, that we have to remind people, in whether it be in schools in the United States or wherever else, that we're not dealing with homogeneous groups, whether it be white groups or black groups. And Abdul has skillfully foregrounded the whole debate about class and class divisions amongst us as an African diaspora, as well as the other contradictions to do with gender and patriarchy and so on and so forth. So what we need to do, I think, is to ensure that we are providing teachers with the confidence to be clear about what their pedagogy is, where it's coming from, what view they have of knowledge production and knowledge dissemination, knowledge validation, so that they could resist that authoritarianism that Abdul was talking about, and provide opportunities for young people to be clearer themselves about their direction of travel.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think that definitely there needs to be more kind of integration between, as you would say, the academy and teachers, because a lot of teachers feel out of their depth in terms of what they then have to struggle against, you know, and some of them have spoken with me about it, and I know so many are speaking with you about it. Abdul, any?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think first of all, the important point about whoever you are in society, there are others in your same condition, and therefore organizing yourselves is the first and most important political point. People are not alone. They need to organize. And so a teacher needs to find other teachers, and you need to have some level of collectivity. Some call it a union, whatever it is. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there is this question of connecting to the community. Teachers teach people, and youngsters have families, and families live in communities. I mean, when I was growing up in elementary school, teachers, if you got into trouble, teachers would walk you home and talk to your parents. In other words, there was a connection.
Sure.
And it seems to me that in terms of pedagogy at the elementary school level and secondary school level, there are 3 points I want to make. And it really has to do with this concept that I think characterizes much theorizing in Black studies called Black experientialism. The word is the Black experience, Black experientialism. In other words, it's to the experience that we have to go. And so the first experience everybody has, and Margaret laid it out beautifully, is your family and your own genealogy. Because that genealogy is a particular narrative that intersects with broader conceptions of Black history and geography. And a lot of times, unfortunately, you get interested in genealogy when you have gray hair, you know, and then you don't have anybody you can ask. So we have to get youngsters to start interviewing their parents and their grandparents and try to understand their own history, where you come from. I often tell young people, you know, particularly in small towns, et cetera, they want to go to the big city, you know, and I say, look, if you really get involved in your own little village, in your own circumstance, it's way more interesting than television. You know, they're gangsters, they're heroes, you know, there's all kinds of stories that are right around you if you have the eyes and ears to perceive. So that's the first thing, family genealogy. The second thing, of course, is community. There are leaders. There are, there are women, for example, who are the matriarchs of a neighborhood. There's something we used to call mother wit, folk wisdom. These sayings that people have, those are powerful philosophical concepts that you need to understand. I mean, I still hold on to a penny saved is a penny earned. There's all kinds of sayings, and that's powerful, and I mean, today people really need to get into that. But the other thing I want to end with is this whole question of the rituals of political culture. There are rituals that help to institutionalize meaning. Whether or not this is Kwanzaa, whether or not this is the first, Black people are really focused on the first. And that's important because it represents a gateway, not just to valorize who was first, but first means that it's the beginning for all of us. And I think that that's an important aspect of teaching even the children, is rituals of political culture that systematize what culture is, which is the meaning of life, the values that we can use, whether it's beauty, whether it's morality, but those values, and those are the values that you even bring to scholarship. And that's the, now I just want to respond to Kehinde, just one point. Be more optimistic, my brother. In other words, even the people who aren't connected to the community can make a contribution. I don't think we need that many more studies of plantations, but hey, anybody studying another plantation is a contribution, and the other aspect is that once we hold on to these Black Studies programs, we can criticize the manifest function, but there's also a latent function, and that latent function is the uprising of students. When Katrina occurred, students rose up. When the murders occurred, students rose up. So the aggregation of students in Black studies, even studying our history, is the precondition for the uprising. Now we're still seeing spontaneous uprising, Black Lives Matter, the spontaneous movements. Now we're entering that period of cadre development. Those of us who are seniors, we've been on this journey for many decades. We're now seeing the possibility of the people who are active in Black Lives Matter to orient themselves so that they can do the long distance run, because that's what we need out of this current generation. Mm-hmm. But anyway, be more positive, my brother. Help is on the way,
Can I just respond quickly? I got to run and look after my kids. So I just like to say, 100%. I still work in the university, so I must be a little bit positive at least, right? I'm hanging on with the thread, but no, I mean, like, it's all good, and I think like definitely the inspirational stuff from Black Studies in the States has been really, really powerful. And I think actually when you talk to our students, actually seeing the students and seeing the students' faces, they're learning like this completely thing they never even thought about before. That's where you get really positive, because for them it's life changing, like 100% life changing. They've never seen anything like the kind of education they get when they come to uni, which is tying to that question about the schools. The schools are a problem, but I think what we don't understand in that a lot of the time is that it's because of the universities. Like what's taught in schools is what is the knowledge in university, and hopefully, that's one of the positive outcomes you can hopefully have with Black Studies in universities. If you can shift that knowledge production in universities, then that can and will filter down into the schools, and then it's not going to be completely alien to them to learn about Black people and the Black perspective, etc., etc. So I'll try and stay positive. I'm going to. I have to. I learned from your Gus Margaret's example, and it's always a struggle in it. So we always got to keep moving forward. But I really have to run. So I'm going to congratulate you on the book as well, and say thank you to everybody as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Kehinde. Thanks a lot for your contribution. I want to ask something. I want to say something. I want to speak to just kind of mention the threat to Black studies. Kehinde, you're not under pressure to. You can leave us now. I know you need to, but Gus and Margaret and Abdul. I mean, in the UK, there is, you know, Black studies in a way, there's you know, there is under threat, and there are faculty members in, you know, in various universities who are really actually like practically under threat, you know, now on redundancy, you know, redundancy notice, and all of that is happening. And as I say this, I'm actually remembering that my first degree, I mean, I did law for a year, and my parents were like, oh, she's doing law. And then I didn't want to anymore. And then I did sociology and media for a year, and they were like, okay, she's in sociology and media. And then I really didn't want to anymore. It was so dull. And then I found Caribbean studies. I found the degree in Caribbean studies, and it just like, it was like a total love affair. Caribbean studies and English, and that went by the wayside. I mean, Gus, you know Professor Clem Cicheran,
Yes.
I'm almost sure, you know, and Clem and Rita Christian and Jean Stubbs, and these were people like really put together a fantastic degree course. And it was really popular. And then afterwards, after some time, the university was like, well, no, there are not enough students applying, and no. And then it was, you know, it was about business, and it was about numbers, and it went the way of all things. And you have that sort of, that is happening again. There's a threat. Gus, do you know more about this? I know that Black Studies lecturers are under, yeah.
Yeah, and for a number of reasons. I mean, you're absolutely right. The one of the reasons why Clem's course and all that wonderful stuff that Winston James and Gene Stubbs and they were doing collapsed was because they were having to operate within the parameters of the academy. And although they wanted to empower more and more students, Black students particularly, to be able to use that stuff and be more active in the social movements we were building outside the academy, there was not from outside the academy the kind of pressure on the institution that would have created space for those pioneering people. So in a sense, what was happening in the ivory tower was not sufficiently known in terms of its politics, the struggle was not sufficiently known within communities so that those communities could begin to make some demands. And even now, there are courses struggling because, for example, MAs in Black Studies, one of which I am associated with and teach on, because the university decides it's a niche area. They use the word niche, and unless you can demonstrate you've got 24 students or whatever, they cut it. So the fact that they have neglected to do any of that kind of work for decades, not just for Black people, but for those white people who need to do some repair on their own psyche, it doesn't matter. And that's part of a trend, both in the United States and in this country, of these institutions becoming corporate entities. You know, they're like Sainsbury's and Tesco's writ large. And it is as if the whole education journey of people have got to be squeezed into that neoliberal mold where the market determines everything and you determine what is niche or what is going to bring you a lot of money and so on. So
Yes,
which is why,
I mean,
why I say the
Abdul Alkalimat, Kehinde Andrews, Margaret Busby, Gus John, I want to thank you all. Abdul, we wish you the best of the best with this new book. And actually, we wish ourselves the best of the best with this new book. May it be a real tool for us and for younger, you know, for younger activists and their children to come. Absolutely. And so on. And we look forward to the forthcoming book. God, don't you take a little rest? Oh gosh, you're writing.
When
We
we
love
get-
it. We
when
love
we
it,
get rid-
Abdul.
When we get rid of this damn virus, I'm coming over there, you
Yeah.
know, to be with you all and give Margaret a nice hug.
Oh, I look forward to that.
Wonderful, Abdul. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And thank you, Pluto, for setting up this.
Yes, absolutely.